Hard Drivin. Released in 1991 for the Sega Genesis courtesy of Tengen and based on the 1989 Atari Games developed arcade game of the same name, a title known for its then revolutionary smooth 3D graphics. But more importantly, Hard Drivin was the game that gave us this.
For safety reasons, the drivers inside are getting pwned as they respawn in the form of another driver. Pwned!
And then someone took that audio and turned it into a Mario Kart video. Go figure. Now, precisely 500 reviews ago, we looked at Race Drivin for the Super Nintendo, a horrendous port of the sequel to Hard Drivin, which realistically was more of the same except with more stuff, and by the way, they also made a Genesis version, which is what we're looking at next, as well as a Game Boy version, which is actually better than it has any business being, for whatever that's worth. But I digress. How does Hard Drivin on the Mega Drive play? Well, at first glance, the visual aspect isn't entirely fantastic. I mean, the general graphics aren't too bad as far as replicating all the 3D stuff. Quite impressive, actually, considering this was released long before 32X add-ons and virtual processors. Even if the detail isn't quite as sharp, of course. Some of the bridges and structures have some transparency effects applied, which is kinda neat, I guess. Now, obviously, it doesn't take much to see that the frame rate is fairly choppy, and that makes the game a bit of an eyesore as a result. It's not too bad when you're just driving along a road and there's a couple houses in the distance, but introduce some major obstacle and that's where it starts to chug quite a bit, particularly with very large objects being up close and personal. Now, while Hard Drivin doesn't look great, it actually plays well enough. Or at least far better than I was expecting this to play. So let's backtrack a bit, okay? Hard Drivin is a one-player driving racing game, whatever you want to call it. You set your various options, difficulty, choice of speed units, which lane the traffic is on so the overseas European folks don't get left out. And once all that's done, you start the game. From there, you could choose to drive around a speed course, which is a fairly basic track, or the stunt track, which has more challenging terrain like bridges to leap across and even a loop-de-loop, and not a single blue rodent to be found anywhere around these parts. So you race around a couple of tracks in the chosen track that you've chosen, and it's like the old pole position game. First run is to qualify for the actual race, and if you're quick enough, you'll be challenged to a race against the dreaded Phantom Photon on the stunt track, which does you no good if you've been racing the speed track, which is generally the easier option because it doesn't have the big loop-de-loop thing that blocks your view and thus you have no way of telling if traffic's coming your way because all you're seeing is pavement. It's the one aspect of the track that I don't really like, though I'd imagine it being quite impressive to pull off technically until you try to drive on it. The surprising aspect is that control is actually quite responsive and solid. I mean, you look at the frame rate, it's not the smoothest frame rate you'll come across, so you expect control to be equally underwhelming, but controlling your vehicle isn't as problematic as I thought it was going to be. On the contrary, steering is as smooth as you're going to get with the digital pad and also the game in general. The accelerating, braking, turning, and the gear shifting, if you have it on manual, all work as expected. The loop-de-loop is a giant mess, but that's not the port's fault, it's just a mess all around. And sure, it can be difficult to come to grips with your car. It is, after all, a finicky piece of equipment, but this is also true to the arcade original, so it's not the fault of the conversion process. I mean, all in all, in terms of play control, Hard Drivin over-delivered, and I had some fun times with this. I don't know, take this as high praise for the Genesis port of a demanding 3D arcade title, or further damnation of the SNES port of Race Drivin, which came out a year later and ended up much worse. Again, to reiterate, the 3D graphics look decent but not great, the frame rate isn't fantastic, it gets worse with large objects on screen. Still, given the hardware, the fact that it's not outright horrid is an impressive feat without any of the 3D doohickeys that would be introduced later. I know it isn't great, some people will crap on the game's visuals, and I'm okay with that. I'm willing to give it the benefit of the doubt, considering the time and whatever the case may be. Race Drivin's another story, but we'll get to that soon enough. Sound is fairly minimal, you got a couple jingles here and there that play out in that quality Genesis synth. The engine sounds alright for droning noise, the crashes and explosions could have used a little more oomph to make you feel the impact a little more, but other than that, little reason to complain about the audio quality. Some could argue this needed more music. The arcade didn't have music either, except for the titles and the intermissions, just the jingles and whatever, I didn't really mind it. Overall, Hard Drivin for the Sega Genesis isn't that great of a driving game, and to be fair, the arcade original isn't all that great either. Not without the force feedback steering to add to the experience. Without that, you're just left with a stiff driving car simulator otherwise. But I gotta give credit for trying to pull off the 3D visuals on the Mega Drive and not have it be total garbage. Like, this plays better than I expected it to. I expected it to play horridly, and it's well enough, like I said. With that in mind, however, there are far better racers on the Genesis worth your while, and if you really want to play Hard Drivin, the arcade version is still the most ideal. However you find the way to play it. If you want to go the legit route, for lack of a better term, the Midway Arcade Treasures 2 compilation has the game for PS2, Xbox, and whatever. Points for effort, though, as far as this port is concerned, but that's about it.